Thanks, everyone. Welcome to our session on virtual production for broadcast. Excited to be here today with you guys. I'm Mindlin. I'm General Manager for Disguise. And with me today, I have Mathew Leland from 4Wall Entertainment. Maybe we'll just jump into, Matt, give us a little background on what you guys do. What does 4Wall do?
Sure. 4Wall is traditionally a broadcast and rental company. So they work a lot with gear. I came on about 3 years ago to start pushing into a couple other verticals. So myself and my old business partner, Ben Danielowski, came on board. And we've been working on virtual production ever since.
Awesome. And what is virtual production or XR? What does it mean?
Well, I think for the purposes of this conversation, they're definitely somewhat arbitrary terms, but in my mind, at least from a day-to-day basis, I do think of VP or virtual production as something that tends to be a little more in the cinematic, episodic world. We're generally working in camera. And when people start talking about XR, I start thinking about compositing and set extensions, AR, integrating data into some of that. So that kind of falls for me a little more into the broadcast side. Obviously, broadcast has been doing AR for a long time. But yeah, they're really the same underlying tools, but slightly different purposes.
And can you go over just some of the projects that you guys worked on that were virtual production or XR and maybe?
Yeah, absolutely. We've done a few things in the cinematic world. Some of the projects we did the season 2 of Russian Doll. There was a large train volume that we've done a lot of case studies on, probably ad nauseum at this point. We just finished a feature. Well, when I say just, I mean 13 months ago, but it takes a while for things to come out. A movie called Daddy-O that's coming out in June. Sony Classic Pictures, and the whole thing was actually shot in a car process, which is kind of cool. And then, of course, more relevant to what we're talking about today, my team works pretty regularly with the ESPN team on their studios. And Sports Center after that. Obviously, they have incredible people, so makes the job easy. As you can see, we're actually looking at some of the work right now. But yeah, those are a few projects.
Check that out. It's fine. We can just pass it around. Yeah, just talking a little bit more about ESPN. Yeah, like you mentioned, they have Studio C. Maybe you can talk a little bit more in depth, especially about the Studio C Catalyst stage, kind of very unique broadcast, I would say state-of-the-art studio.
Yeah, definitely. I think that what's really great about ESPN is they kind of jump in with both feet. They created the Catalyst stage to be as much of the technology they want to embrace in the future as possible. And so we're working with things like Ghost Frame. There's 4 cameras set up in the stage. We're working with, robotics and automation. The entire stage is Mark Roberts based robotic systems. And then, of course, there are, I believe, 27 Disguise servers that run the entire stage. If you can imagine, we are working in a full 4K throughput, even though broadcast isn't yet. They're thinking ahead, and so it's a very complex setup. But essentially, I mean, it's pretty straightforward. We're running cameras and chains. The robotics provide the tracking, and generally speaking, they love to work with 1 or 2 operators. So it's quite an enormous amount of technology for 2 people to operate. So one of the big call outs that I would say is, as a team internally, ESPN has really spent a lot of time creating their own customized control front end, so that these operators kind of see this giant system as something that is comfortable, looks very similar to the way that they've been working in AR in the other studios. So, Disguise and Unreal working somewhat in the background, doing the heavy lifting, and then there's some glossy front end that makes it a little more simpler for these operators to work.
And speaking of Disguise, how does Disguise kind of help in that complex production, fix some of the challenges or help some of the challenges?
Yeah, definitely. In general, we use Disguise for all of our VP, and there are other tools out there, but for us, it's about scalability. It's about daily operation. It's really about having tools that we can train operators to use. And Disguise kind of has that in spades. So, we've got spatial calibrations and color calibrations. There is timeline-based programming. There is a large ability to bring in inputs, which is huge for broadcast. What I think Disguise did in this specific project is gave us the tool set to help kind of reintegrate the technology in a way that, again, feels normal to the operators and to the engineers that are there. Whereas, a more sort of DIY, like customized system might be more difficult. There's a lot of tools in these boxes that are ready for broadcast.
Yeah. Just keep passing the mic around. Talk about technical challenges. Yeah, how does that tie into their workflow? I mean, I think even more interestingly, like what they do inside Sports Center is, 24/7, a lot of changing graphics. It's not XR, but maybe you could talk about that workflow and how does it, tailor towards broadcast more than just VP.
Thank you. Appreciate it. I think Sports Center is a really good example of taking a very complex toolkit and creating a way to use it on an existing setup. So at Sports Center, there are, for basically like a very quick understanding, there are 4 LED surfaces that already existed. And what they wanted to do was to deploy something very similar to what they were working on in Studio C. But this is a large show. This is not something that they can bring down for months and months and months to work on. And so we were able to, bring in the provided server package and integrate it within days. We could do a lot of the heavy lifting, from scene work to prevising all long before we were ever within the studio. I think it's a great example of virtual production in the capacity that it's a toolkit. It's not one way of doing things. And often I think people think the buy-in is too big. And I think we were talking about, the differences between $2.5 million studio and a $150,000 server package. And what that means is that people don't have to completely change their workflow just to embrace the future of technology. They can slowly start to put it in as they go. But there are some cutting edge things, in my opinion, that what's happening on Sports Center that are directly related to Disguise. We are pushing, 8 aux inputs that are basically 8 SDIs that come in to Disguise and then get pushed into the Unreal scene. And so what that means is the studio can function exactly how it did in the past, by feeding live content at any moment into these virtual screens, which is pretty incredible.
Yeah, and that studio is using like Unreal as the real-time graphics rendering, right? About other types of techniques, like using video or 2.5D workflow. Maybe chat a bit about that. I know you guys have experience working with that.
Definitely. I think there are larger broadcasters that already are working pretty heavily in AR, and some of them have moved into Unreal, which is a huge benefit, right? Because they have a team, or at least they have the resources to create the content. A lot of people don't, and I think that is a buy-in that some companies aren't ready to do. But, what we're finding with new projects that we're working on and even new clients that we're talking to is there's this great wide world of 2.5D, which ultimately is, using multiple 2D plates to create the perspective and the parallax. What that allows for is, shorter times to create content. It allows for iteration to happen quickly. The optimization process is not nearly as grueling as. Let's see. All right, we're going to keep smoking. So where was I? Oh yeah. So I think that the 2.5D workflow can be incredibly powerful, as backgrounds, as people want to move into the sort of camera tracking space. and even just on-camera LED, it's a great thing.
Cool. And maybe let's talk about like the process to create 2.5D. Like, what does that mean? Meaning, how do you start with, and how do you end up with that perspective?
I mean, I think there's a couple ways to approach it. There are some programs that allow that to be automated with AI to a certain extent. And there's still what I would say is the old fashioned way, which is really getting into Photoshop, cutting something up, curating the look, and really considering what you're trying to create. You know, a lot of the easiest example that we see so often, especially in broadcast, is just like they want a skyline, and skylines are very easy to create in 2.5D because oftentimes you're not dealing with anything within like the foreground or midground. You're really looking off into the distance, and that's where this can be an incredibly effective workflow. So really you're going and finding high-res plates and content and kind of curating that look, creating that depth on camera.
Yeah, I think there's some AI technologies that are also helping you with that, right? How do you guys see the production go that's different from, say, film production, commercial side of things versus?
I think the first thing that I would say is I do try to approach both of those the same, but the priorities are different. So in cinema, we are always looking for the perception of photorealism. We're always looking for that sort of cinematic look. In broadcast, it's not that we're not looking for high quality imagery. It's that our priorities have to be different. We need consistency. We need to make frame rate no matter what all the time, especially when you're live on air. But as far as that goes with AI, I'm definitely not an expert in AI, and we know that that's going to be the future of content. There we go, back on again. Content creation, and I think what we're using AI for is a more utilitarian use. So generative fill in Photoshop allows us to cut up an image, fill in the gaps that we do, kind of accordion it out into 3D space. You're able to fill in the spots to the airline. So that's kind of where we're utilizing it now in the content creation side. Not necessarily intellectual property like generating something from scratch, but actually just helping us kind of fill in the gap.
Like as a tool, basically helping you create content. Yeah, I mean, we played around with having this new integration with Grigory. Basically, it takes the plate and does all the work for you right now. Again, just like a tool. So, on the content generation side, what are your thoughts about AI and, you're right, and you see that going? I know it's loaded.
It's a big question. I'll keep my opinion to myself, but I know for a fact with clients that we work with, there is still a huge skepticism about property, right? People are very much afraid to be putting things in there without understanding the implication and what that means in the future. But there's no doubt that this is going to be the way forward, especially the way that we have to create content so quickly now. So many platforms and so many, different streams that have to happen that we're going to have to find a way to make content quicker. But for me, I see it as a curation tool, an iteration tool, because there's still going to have to be somebody at the end of the day deciding what the brand is, deciding what the approach is, deciding what the look is. And if we're choosing from, automated iteration, that's, it's still to an extent, a human being making that decision.
Yeah, something I noticed I was on a shoot months ago where they were using AI. They would just do a shoot of boxes and figure out how to breathe is, and then AI would kind of fill in the gaps and then they'd know what the total breathe is. So it's cool how, again, they're using it as a tool versus just like make this whole thing. So, what are other technologies that you're excited about or you see kind of up and coming?
I was thinking about this question because obviously I knew it was on the list. Me personally, I'm really excited about furthering the technologies that are already here. Things like higher frame rates are really important because I think the speed at which we want to move cameras and the way that we want to work on LED especially is something that is going to benefit greatly from that. Color workflow is something that we're really excited about. I think I was mentioning you just before this. It's not a broadcast project, but this last feature we worked on, we had a really good opportunity to kind of open up the hood of Disguise in its ACES workflow and Brompton and really play with the color pipeline because I think that's something that's going to be crucial. If it doesn't look good and if we can't use it in the same way that we, have color workflows in post, then this is not going to be as effective of a tool. So for me, I'm really excited about kind of these technologies that are in their infancy really coming into their own and allowing us to create high quality content.
Yeah, I mean, on the frame rate side and the color side, I guess how do you see that relating to broadcast or, innovations in broadcast?
As far as color goes, I think there are two things. One is just because you're going to be pushing Rec 709 out doesn't mean that you don't want to work in an expanded space when you're making these decisions, especially something like ESPN who has thousands and thousands of color palettes they have to get right every day on air. And we have to also remember they're not only doing this cutting edge Studio C technology, every one of their other stages also have to match this. So I think that the more control we have over color, the easier it is for that transition to happen as these traditional studios and then green screen studios and then LED studios all have to exist in kind of the same environment. As far as frame rate, I mean, multi-frame workflows, frame remapping, ghost frame, those things are incredible, allowing a director to, on a single LED environment, be able to see everything fully rendered before they cut to it. I think it's what is going to allow this to scale in broadcast, because I don't think anybody wants to, although I said this last time on a panel, I think last year, and a gentleman from White Light was like, oh, we do it that way, it's fine. But like the idea of cutting to something and then confirming that it's good, it scares me a little bit. And I imagine other people too. So the more that we're able to do in frame rate, the more cameras we can have, the more, it just goes on from there. So I think it's gonna definitely help the workflow.
What are the challenges there on the multi-camera workflow? I know like with ESPN, 4 cameras, right, that they're doing ghost frame on. Does it get more challenging with going from 2 to 3 to 4? Where is the limit?
Camera's crucial in this situation, like global shutter, the ability to really tune to the frame. But like anything else, I think, at least in that studio, it's pretty stable. Occasionally we have to go back and check, but you're talking about adjusting in minute, tiny detail, interframe delays and vertical sinks and horizontal sinks. But once you find it, I think it really just kind of locks in. I honestly have found that the multi-frame stuff has been one of the easier things to really get a handle on in the last couple of years.
Great. Well, I think that's all the time we have for today. Really appreciate you being with us here today. If anyone has any questions or they want to learn more about Disguise or For Well Entertainment, happy to take some questions here or reach out to us online. We have a QR code up there that you guys can scan. And thanks for doing this today, Matt.
Appreciate it. Thank you, sir.